AITA. I cut my wife off from our finances because she wouldn't stop ordering takeout. I 41 male have been married to my wife 39 female for nearly 15 years. We've had our fair share of ups and downs, but I always thought we'd find a way to make it work. She's had a few health issues over the years, nothing too severe, but just enough that she says work is impossible for her. This has been a point of contention between us because, 5 years ago, she stopped working altogether. She said the physical demands and emotional stress of any job were just too much for her. I tried to be understanding and patient, thinking, if she's truly uncomfortable or in pain, I wouldn't want her to suffer just to bring in a paycheck. But over time, I noticed that while she complained of exhaustion and discomfort often, there were times she seemed perfectly fine. It wasn't that she couldn't work at all, but more like she just didn't want to. So, I made the decision to stop pressing her about it, and we agreed that I would support her financially. I had always been the primary breadwinner, so at first, I figured it wouldn't be that big of a change. But suddenly, I was responsible for everything, every single expense, every bill, every unplanned cost. My job is steady but nothing glamorous, and it doesn't come with a massive paycheck. I don't have the luxury of overtime or big bonuses. It's reliable but modest, enough to cover our needs with a bit extra if we're careful. I worked hard to keep us comfortable without stretching too thin, but it was a balancing act every month, especially as inflation hit and prices started creeping up on everything from groceries to gas. Initially, I tried to manage our budget with a lot of care. I cut back on unnecessary expenses, avoided impulse buys, and went out of my way to make sure we were covered. I would scour through sales, clipping coupons to try and stretch our dollars. I honestly thought she'd appreciate it, maybe help out by being a bit frugal herself or making some compromises here and there. After all, I was carrying the weight of it all. I thought she'd see that and understand that, with me being the only income, we needed to be careful. I was hoping she'd show some level of responsibility, or at least respect the effort I was putting in, but instead, the opposite happened. Over time, it felt like her spending habits got more and more careless, as if the concept of budgeting simply didn't apply to her anymore. It began small. A couple of years ago, she started ordering takeout a couple of times a week. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have days when we're too tired to cook, right? I figured a couple of orders here and there wouldn't hurt. But then it became 3 times a week, and I noticed she was ordering food even on days when she had a lot of free time. She wasn't busy or stressed, just bored, I guess. Before I knew it, 3 times a week turned into almost every single day. Sometimes, she wasn't just ordering dinner for both of us but ordering multiple times just for herself. I'd come home, hungry and ready to unwind, only to find that she'd already eaten. And not once, but sometimes twice, leaving me on my own for dinner. The sight of her delivery bags and containers became all too familiar, littering the kitchen counter as if it were a restaurant's back office. And meanwhile, I was the one doing all the grocery shopping, making sure our fridge was stocked with fresh produce, snacks, and even frozen meals she could heat up quickly. I made a conscious effort to keep a variety of foods I knew she liked, just so she'd have options. I bought quick, easy-to-make meals, the kind where all she'd need to do is pop them in the microwave or oven. I was really trying to make it as convenient as possible, thinking that if she had things she liked at home, she wouldn't feel the need to order out all the time. But every time I brought it up, she'd brush it off, saying she didn't feel like cooking or didn't find anything in the fridge that she wanted. And yet, she'd always managed to find something appealing enough on a delivery app to satisfy her craving. Then came the breaking point last month. I was going over our finances and nearly had a heart attack when I saw the total. She had spent $1,176 on delivery apps alone. That's almost as much as our rent. I was in disbelief. How could she justify spending that much on takeout when we had a fully stocked kitchen? It's not like she was ordering from high-end places, either. The sheer volume of it was what blew my mind. There were several days in the month where she'd ordered food twice, sometimes for breakfast and lunch, other times for lunch and dinner. It was out of control. I confronted her, feeling like I was practically begging for an explanation. I asked how she could possibly think spending that much on takeout was okay, especially when there was no shortage of food in the house. She looked at me with this half-amused, half-bored expression, like I was the one overreacting. Her response: she needed the variety that only takeout could give her, and ordering in was one of the only things that made her feel better. At that moment, I made a decision. I was done with the endless cycle of stress, arguments, and financial strain. I went to our bank's website and began the process. I pulled a chunk of money out of our savings, our hard-earned emergency fund, the one we'd both contributed to over the years, and used it to completely pay off the credit card. It felt surreal, a mix of relief and guilt as I hit that confirm button to settle the balance. This was money I'd wanted to save for an emergency or an opportunity to improve our lives, not for takeout debt. Then, with a few more clicks, I canceled the card altogether. A part of me hesitated, wondering if this was too drastic, but I couldn't think of any other way to get her attention, to show her that her spending was not only unreasonable but actively harming our stability. Next, I took the funds from our joint account and funneled them into my own personal account. That decision felt heavy, almost symbolic. It wasn't just about controlling the money. It was about reclaiming some sense of normalcy and stability in our finances. For too long, I had been struggling to keep everything afloat while her spending habits kept adding weight. I didn't tell her about any of this. I figured she would find out soon enough. I wasn't trying to humiliate her or shock her unnecessarily, but I was done talking. I'd tried that route too many times, reasoning, budgeting discussions, even attempts to make this easier on her by suggesting we cook together or making her favorite foods easy to access. Nothing had worked, and each time I brought it up, I felt more like I was talking to a wall. So, I decided it was time for action. I admit, I felt a knot in my stomach all day, knowing she'd eventually try to place an order and find that her card was declined. I knew she'd be furious. A part of me braced for the explosion of texts and accusations I knew were coming, but I just couldn't let it go on any longer. I was at my absolute wit's end, feeling like I'd exhausted every other option, but her spending had only gotten worse. I was practically shaking with frustration, feeling completely trapped by her habits and helplessness. I was terrified of what would happen next, but at the same time, there was a deep, underlying sense of relief, a feeling that, at least for now, I had done what I could to protect us. Sure enough, it wasn't long before she tried to order takeout, and that's when everything hit the fan. My phone buzzed, and there was her text, "What's going on with the card?" I took a deep breath and told her she was cut off, plain and simple. Her response was immediate, and it was exactly what I'd expected: a barrage of furious texts, each more accusatory than the last. She called me controlling, said I was treating her like a child, accused me of being unsupportive, even manipulative. She went on about how this was humiliating and how she couldn't believe I would punish her like this. It stung, honestly. I didn't want to feel like the bad guy, but in that moment, I just couldn't engage. I replied once, saying that her daily takeout habit was something we simply couldn't afford, and that there was plenty of food at home. I tried to keep it as calm and straightforward as possible. I didn't want to fuel the fire by responding to every single accusation. I just put my phone down and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the hurt. When I got home that evening, I opened the door to find her lying on the floor, draped across the living room rug like she was in some dramatic stage play. She looked up at me with this pained expression and told me, weakly, that she had low blood sugar and was faint from hunger. I'll admit, it was hard to take her seriously in that moment. I knew for a fact she'd had options all day. I pointed out the fridge, the freezer, the pantry, all full of food she could have easily made or microwaved if she really needed to eat. But she just glared at me, her expression a mix of anger and hurt, as if I had somehow betrayed her. As I looked around, something else caught my eye. She had actually taken out the garbage, a task she rarely, if ever, did. I knew the outdoor bin was a mystery to her because she almost never bothered with it. That alone was suspicious, and I couldn't help but wonder if she'd already eaten something earlier in the day and tossed the evidence. Maybe she was trying to bolster her story, trying to convince me that she had truly suffered all day without a meal. But honestly, I was too tired to deal with that. The thought of digging through the trash to confirm my suspicions was exhausting. All I wanted was a quiet night to recover from the mental strain of the day. The rest of the weekend was a nightmare. She barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was to tell me how hurt she was by my betrayal. She accused me of treating her like a child and said she couldn't believe I would humiliate her this way. She even suggested that I was being abusive by controlling her access to funds. I reminded her that we're a single-income household and that her spending had become unsustainable. I told her I didn't mind supporting her financially, but this was about basic survival. She just wouldn't hear it. I don't know what else to do. She's acting as if I've taken away her most basic need, even though I've literally stocked the house with enough food for weeks. I thought this would be a wake-up call for her to take some responsibility, but now I'm worried it might end up tearing us apart. I feel like I'm the only one putting effort into making our life work, and instead of gratitude or understanding, I'm getting hostility and accusations. I'm at a loss here. Part of me feels guilty for taking such drastic action, but another part of me wonders if I should have done it sooner. Update. 9 days ago, I made a post here about the financial chaos I was facing with my wife's out-of-control spending. The aftermath wasn't pleasant. 4 days after I canceled the card and moved our joint funds, it was like living with a storm that never let up. My wife cycled through every possible emotion, going from fury to self-pity to desperate bargaining, then back to anger again. She accused me of financially abusing her, a phrase she clung to like a shield. I'm not even sure she fully understood what it meant, but it became her go-to accusation. Every time I tried to explain, to point out the grocery stockpile in the kitchen, to remind her why I'd made this choice, she'd interrupt with the same refrain. You're controlling me. You're cutting me off. You're financially abusing me. Over and over, like a broken record, until the words lost all meaning. Then came the tantrums. These weren't just bouts of anger. They were explosive, exhausting spectacles that filled every corner of our home. She'd pace back and forth, hands flailing, her voice rising to a level that I was sure our neighbors could hear. She made a point of standing near the fridge or pantry, almost as if they were props in some twisted performance. She would yell about how starved she was, how she was malnourished because I had the audacity to deny her the option of ordering takeout. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Our kitchen was filled with every type of food she could possibly want. There were fresh vegetables, quick-fix meals, frozen dinners, snacks, even ready-made meals that took no more than a few minutes to microwave. But none of it was good enough, or at least, that's what she claimed. She escalated things by tossing food out of the fridge and pantry, one item at a time, like some bizarre protest. At first, it was just a few things here and there, an apple, a container of yogurt, maybe a packet of deli meat, but soon it became boxes of cereal, bags of frozen veggies, even pre-prepped meals that I had specifically bought so she could have something easy to make. Each time I'd go to the fridge to get something, I'd find a gap where there should have been groceries. I was picking perfectly good food out of the trash, trying to salvage what I could, but each time I found more, it made me feel like I was cleaning up after a child throwing a tantrum. I couldn't believe that she'd actually go to this extent, creating an artificial shortage of food as if that would somehow justify her demands for takeout. It was infuriating, exhausting, and deeply disappointing all at once. Her tantrums weren't just about the food, though. They were fueled by accusation after accusation. She began throwing around threats of divorce, telling me that she couldn't live with someone who would treat her this way. She made it sound as though I was depriving her of basic necessities, framing herself as a victim in a situation she had created. The constant threats were draining, and part of me wondered if she even understood what she was saying, or if she was simply lashing out because I'd disrupted her routine. I'd hoped that she would see the reason behind my decision, or at least meet me halfway. But instead, I felt like I was dealing with someone entirely different, a stranger who was willing to destroy our home, our finances, and even our marriage just for the sake of convenience and indulgence. Then came one of the most surreal moments of all, an email notification from my bank, letting me know there had been multiple failed attempts to access my online account. That's when I realized that she had been trying to guess my password, likely in a bid to get back at the money I'd taken away. I almost laughed. It was absurd, like something out of a poorly written sitcom. She had been so desperate to get her hands on money that she'd resorted to what felt like childish tricks, as though guessing my password would somehow solve everything. Thankfully, she didn't come close to cracking it. I mean, Takeout 1 to 3 would have been an obvious guess, but my password was far more secure. I wasn't worried about her guessing it, but the lengths she was willing to go to were unsettling. She was that determined to get access to funds I'd specifically set aside to prevent her reckless spending. It was surreal, almost comical if it weren't so sad. The sheer level of desperation and obsession with Takeout, it was as if nothing else in her life mattered. Then, last Friday, everything just stopped. Out of nowhere, the accusations, complaints, and tantrums ceased. The silence was almost jarring, like the eerie calm that follows a storm. She was quiet, going about her day without any of the usual outbursts or demands. She wasn't yelling at me about financial abuse, wasn't calling me cruel for denying her takeout. She just seemed normal, or at least what had become her normal over the years. For a few days, it was like she'd accepted the situation, that she'd finally come to terms with the fact that the money wasn't there for endless takeout. I started to believe that maybe this drastic step had actually worked, that maybe she'd seen how serious I was about protecting our finances. I allowed myself to hope cautiously that she might be adjusting. She even seemed more engaged around the house, moving around quietly, even using the kitchen to get herself meals. Part of me felt a sense of relief, as though the worst had passed and we might finally be able to settle back into some kind of routine. It felt too good to be true, but I couldn't deny the sense of calm I started to feel. Maybe, just maybe, this drastic step had been the wake-up call she needed to snap out of whatever had driven her to that obsessive spending. And then today rolled around, garbage day. I was going about my usual routine, collecting bags from each room, preparing to take the bin down to the curb. As I lifted the lid, I noticed something odd, a thick, almost overstuffed bag crammed down into the bin. I picked it up, and immediately felt the familiar crinkle of paper bags and wrappers. My stomach sank. I pulled the bag open slightly, and there it was, a half-dozen fast food bags and takeout containers buried inside. There were crumpled bags from burger joints, greasy paper containers from various fast food places, all mixed together like some strange mosaic of indulgence. The sight of it was like a punch to the gut. I thought I'd put an end to this, that the financial barrier would force her to confront the reality of our situation. But here it was, undeniable evidence that she had found a way around it. I felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and disappointment. I couldn't understand how she was doing this, especially since I'd cut off all her access to funds. My mind raced with possibilities. Was she borrowing money from friends or family? Had she somehow managed to get access to my new card information? None of it made any sense, and the betrayal felt raw, like a fresh wound. I'd done everything I could to make her see the severity of the situation, to protect us from her habits. Yet here I was staring at a pile of fast food garbage, proof that she'd somehow found a way to keep indulging, no matter the cost. I knew I had to confront her about it. There was no avoiding it, not with the physical evidence right in front of me. I trusted that this drastic step would be enough to make her realize the impact of her spending. But clearly, I'd underestimated just how far she'd go to satisfy her cravings. So, I steeled myself, ready to finally get the answers I needed. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly wondering how deep her obsession would go, or what new lengths she'd resort to just to get another takeout fix. This wasn't just a spending problem anymore. It was something far deeper, and the realization filled me with a strange mix of sadness and resignation as I prepared to confront her once again. When I confronted her, she tried denying everything at first. She put on this face of complete innocence, as though I'd somehow fabricated the evidence myself. But I wasn't in the mood for games. I dragged the bags into the house, one by one, and laid them out for her to see. She finally confessed, and the truth left me speechless. She had taken out a payday loan. My jaw practically hit the floor. When I first heard loan, I thought she meant she had borrowed a little money from a friend or family member, something reasonable even if still upsetting. But no. She had walked into a payday loan place, signed up for one of those high-interest, predatory loans, and then spent the borrowed money on her beloved takeout. I honestly didn't even know how to process it. Payday loans. Those things are the financial equivalent of poison, with fees so high they can drown people in debt if they're not careful. We were already on a tight budget, and now she had signed us up for a debt with astronomical interest rates. I couldn't believe she'd even been approved. No job, no income of her own, nothing to show she could pay it back. But here we were. I was furious. It felt like every measure I'd taken to try to protect us financially had been thrown back in my face. Within the hour, I froze my credit, desperate to ensure that nothing like this could happen again. I didn't know what else she might try, and the thought of her getting more loans or applying for credit cards in my name was terrifying. After that, I drove her to the payday loan place, where I paid off the loan in cash. I couldn't stand the thought of those obscene fees piling up on top of our already precarious finances. She had cost me another chunk of our savings I had been hoping to hold on to in case of emergency. Now, because of her, I'd have to dip even further into what we had left just to make rent this month. On the drive back, a strange calm washed over me. In a way, her move to take out a payday loan to keep her fast food habit going had brought a sort of clarity. Cutting her off from the credit card had worked. At least technically, she wasn't using delivery apps anymore. Instead, she'd taken to physically driving to the fast food places herself and picking up the orders, using the payday loan money to fund this workaround. The realization hit me like a brick. This wasn't just about money, or convenience, or even laziness. She was completely addicted, to the point where she would take out a loan with outrageous fees, $20 for every $100 she borrowed to get her daily fix. She had already racked up $60 in fees alone. All this for some fast food she couldn't live without. By the time we pulled back into the driveway, I knew what I had to do. I told her that this was it, that we were getting divorced. She didn't argue, didn't fight back. She sat there in stunned silence, but I wasn't looking for her approval or reaction at this point. I felt almost numb. It was the end of something I had tried so hard to save, but there was no denying the reality anymore. This wasn't a marriage. It had become a one-sided financial drain, and I couldn't keep sacrificing my own well-being and future for someone who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. As I sat there, watching her process the words, I felt a bizarre sense of relief. The burden of it all started to lift. I wasn't sure what alimony laws were like in our state or what I'd be facing in terms of financial fallout, but it almost didn't matter. I would deal with whatever came next. For too long, I had been drowning, trying to keep everything afloat while her spending habits dragged me deeper. I don't know where she go from here, or how she support herself, but that's no longer my responsibility. I had done everything I could, and now it was time to let go. For years, I had tried to keep this marriage together, sacrificing my own needs and stability along the way. But in the end, her addiction to fast food, her willingness to take out a payday loan just to keep it going, showed me what I meant to her. I was just a means to an end, a way to fund her lifestyle without consequence. Maybe she eventually realized what she's lost, or maybe she'd be perfectly happy living in a cardboard box under a bridge, as long as Uber Eats will deliver there. As for me, I'm finally free.